about this. Bit of side. Bit of side. I told you he's a magician!
Here's the harsh reality that most snooker players refuse to face. The one mistake that's destroying careers, costing matches, and keeping talented players from reaching their potential. Even Ronnie O'Sullivan, the greatest player of all time, admits this fundamental flaw has cost him matches throughout his career. We're talking about the failure to develop proper break-building skills. You might think this sounds obvious, but here's what most players get completely wrong. They think break-building is just about potting balls in sequence. They believe natural talent and good potting will carry them through. They couldn't be more mistaken. Watch any club match or even professional games and you'll see the same pattern repeating endlessly. Players get to the table, pot a red, maybe a colour, then play safe. They're waiting for loose balls to appear, hoping their opponent makes mistakes. This approach might work in the amateur ranks, but it's a death sentence at higher levels. The numbers don't lie. Ronnie O'Sullivan has compiled 17 official competitive maximum breaks, the most achieved by any professional player. Yet even he's spoken about how break building separates winners from losers. But here's the real kicker. Most players think they're building breaks when they're actually just picking up loose balls. There's a massive difference, and understanding this difference is what separates the wheat from the chaff. True break building is about creating them systematically, controlling the cue ball with surgical precision, and thinking 3 shots ahead while your opponent is still figuring out their next pot. When you watch professionals like John Higgins or Neil Robertson construct a century break, they're not just potting balls. They're manipulating the table layout, setting up sequences, and removing their opponent's chances to get back to the table. This is what casual players miss completely. They see the potting, but they don't understand the chess match happening underneath. Think about it this way. A player who relies on loose balls is basically gambling. They're hoping the table opens up, hoping their opponent leaves something on. But a proper break builder creates their own luck. Even Ronnie O'Sullivan has admitted that break building discipline has been one of his biggest challenges. You might remember his famous clashes with Peter Ebdon. O'Sullivan lost in the quarterfinals 11-13 against Ebdon at the 2005 World Championship, and it perfectly illustrated this point. Ebdon wasn't the most naturally gifted player. He wasn't the fastest around the table or the most spectacular potter. But what Ebdon understood better than most was how to control matches through methodical break building and tactical awareness. Peter Ebdon deserves a memorial award at the World Championship for the best-worst slow break in snooker history, according to Ronnie O'Sullivan. That comment might sound like criticism, but it actually reveals something crucial. Ebdon frustrated Ronnie because he refused to play the open, attacking style that suited O'Sullivan's natural game. Instead, Ebdon controlled the pace, built smaller but more consistent breaks, and never gave Ronnie the loose balls he thrived on. Most players think they understand break building, but they're operating on completely different levels without realizing it. This creates a hierarchy that explains why some players plateau while others continue advancing. At the bottom, you have players who are simply hunting for opportunities. They pot well when balls are available, but they can't create their own chances. They're reactive players, waiting for the game to come to them. This describes roughly 70% of all snooker players. Moving up, some players start understanding position play and basic cue ball control. They can put together breaks of 30 to 50 consistently, but they struggle when the table layout becomes complex. They've learned the basics, but haven't mastered the art of construction. At the top, professionals operate on a completely different plane. They understand how each shot affects not just the next ball, but the entire table position for the remainder of the frame. The gap between consistent 30-break players and systematic frame builders is enormous. Most amateur players give up or plateau permanently at this point because the mental leap required is so significant. Players with excellent potting skills often struggle most with proper break building. Their natural ability becomes a crutch that prevents them from developing the strategic thinking required at higher levels. They can pot balls from difficult positions, so they never learn proper position play. They can recover from poor cue ball positions, so they don't develop the precision required for consistent break building. This is exactly why some players with average potting skills but superior break building knowledge can defeat more talented opponents. They understand something fundamental that the natural potter hasn't learned. Let's return to Peter Ebdon, because his approach perfectly illustrates why break building beats natural talent. Ebdon wasn't trying to embarrass opponents with flashy play. He understood that snooker matches are won by accumulating points consistently and denying opponents scoring opportunities. His method was simple but devastatingly effective. Build steady breaks of 40 to 60 points, play excellent safety when breaks weren't possible, and force opponents to take difficult shots when they did get chances. Against attacking players like Ronnie, this approach was particularly effective because it removed the open table conditions that spectacular potters prefer. Most players practice completely wrong for break building development. They set up easy balls, practice potting drills, and work on their cue action. All important skills, but they're missing the crucial element. Real break building practice means working with difficult table layouts, practicing position play under pressure, and learning to think several shots ahead even when the immediate pot isn't obvious. You need to practice scenarios where you're not looking for the easiest pot, but for the shot that sets up the best sequence. This requires completely different thinking from casual potting practice. Look at any professional match, and you'll see break building thinking from the very first shot. They're positioning for the next shot, the shot after that, and considering how their choice affects the entire frame development. What makes Ronnie O'Sullivan the greatest player in the history of snooker? It lies in his style, in the difference between thinking and acting. This thinking versus acting distinction is crucial. Amateur players act on instinct and immediate opportunities. Professionals think systematically about frame construction. The reason this fundamental error continues destroying players' potential is simple. Break building improvement requires long-term thinking and systematic practice. It's not as immediately satisfying as working on flashy shots or trick shots. Players want instant gratification. They want to see immediate improvement in their potting or their highest break. But real break building development happens slowly, over months and years of consistent practice. Most players give up before they see the benefits, because the improvement curve isn't linear. You might practice for weeks without obvious progress, then suddenly find yourself constructing breaks that seemed impossible before. Every world champion understands something that club players miss. Snooker is won by the player who consistently constructs higher scoring visits to the table. Stephen Hendry didn't become a 7-time world champion because he was the most naturally gifted potter of his generation. He won because he developed the most systematic approach to break building and tactical play. The same principle applies to modern champions. They might have different styles, but they all share one common trait: the ability to construct breaks methodically and deny opponents scoring opportunities. If you recognize yourself in this description, here's the uncomfortable truth. Your current approach isn't going to suddenly start working better. Hoping for improvement without changing your method is the definition of insanity. The breakthrough comes when you stop thinking about individual shots and start thinking about entire sequences. When you stop hunting for loose balls and start creating systematic scoring opportunities. This shift in thinking is difficult because it requires admitting that your current approach is fundamentally flawed. Most players' egos can't handle this realization, so they continue with methods that will never produce the results they want. Real improvement starts with honest self-assessment. If you can't consistently build breaks over 50, you're still operating at the opportunity hunting level. If your highest breaks come from lucky table layouts rather than systematic construction, you need to completely rethink your approach. The players who make this adjustment don't just improve their highest breaks, they transform their entire game, becoming consistent match winners instead of talented players who can't convert their ability into results. This is a wrap for today's video, and here's the question that matters. Are you ready to admit that natural talent isn't enough? Are you willing to develop the systematic break-building skills that separate consistent winners from everyone else? Because until you do, you'll remain part of the 90% of players whose potential is destroyed by this one fundamental mistake. And for more snooker content, click the screen below.